Yesterday, the High Court in Pretoria ruled that the liquidators of the company formerly known as Bosasa personally pay the legal costs of the application to have the liquidation reversed. This comes following the now named Africa Global Operations chairperson, Gumede, filing an urgent application on the 4th of March seeking to reverse the company having gone into voluntary liquidation. So what are the implications of this case? Well, to break it down for us, I'm joined in studio by Dr. Zolani, Buba and Muzi, Zwane, who are business rescue experts. Thanks very much for joining us, sir. Sirs. Super. This is a very confusing outcome because my understanding is that the Bosasa board approached whatever organization you approached to go into voluntary liquidation. So just break down to us, you know, the implications of this. Did they change their mind, and why was the judge so lenient and understanding? How can you make such an error?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think I don't really want to go into their rationale for entering into voluntary liquidation, but rather just to go into the different compositions of voluntary liquidation and business rescue. So when a company is in liquidation, there's an option that is available in terms of Chapter 6 of the Companies Act to have those liquidation proceedings converted into business rescue. So this is done by way of an application by an affected person in relation to that company. So that could either be a shareholder, an employee, or a creditor of that particular company. So they would then apply to court to have those liquidation proceedings converted into business rescue, and they would have to then point out those factors that are relevant for a company going into business rescue, which is basically that the company must be in financially distressed and that there must be prospects of rescuing that company. So, Dr. Zolani, Buba, now that the decision has been taken that African Global Operations must go back into the hands of the board of directors, what are the implications? What are the practical implications? We've heard that government is removing a number of contracts from them. There's a question mark as to their sustainability, but then of course they employ a whole lot of people who could be adversely, affected. So, what are then the implications? Look,
thank you for the question. I think the first aspect in relation to the liquidation, we've heard from newspaper reports that the liquidators are considering appealing the judgment. But from a purely, what would ordinarily happen now is that once the company goes into the hands of the directors of the company, they may want to consider placing the companies into business rescue. Because we have to remember as well that the catalytic event for the voluntary liquidation was the companies actually not being able to secure bank accounts. So I think a viable alternative for the company now, for the companies, would be to go into business rescue, have an impartial and ethical business rescue practitioner coming in to do a proper restructure of the leadership of Bosasa, and also provide some level of confidence to the banks as well.
I find it interesting that you make the qualification that the person must be ethical. One would assume that would be the case in a business rescue situation. But just break it down for our viewers who are not au fait with this. What does a business rescue practitioner aim to do with a company in distress?
Okay, so a business rescue practitioner steps into the shoes of the directors of the company and has to then set out to achieve the objects of Chapter 6, which is to rescue the company. So rescuing of a company has two components. So there's the component of a trade out, which is the colloquial term of a trade out, which means that the company must be returned into a state of solvency in order for it to be able to carry out its affairs. And then there's also the component of securing a better return for creditors. So the component of securing a better return for creditors is it possible to then sell off the assets of the company in a way that ensures that the creditors get a better return than if the company were to immediately go into liquidation. So there's a very distinct process that has to be undertaken in terms of Chapter 6, which culminates with the passing of a business rescue plan. So
if there is truth to the allegations that were made, yes, we saw some stuff on video about the goings on at African Global Operations. If there's any truth to it, who would you be able to sell an operation like that to? Who would be willing to take it up, especially when you know that there aren't any contracts at the back of that, that are there to support that company, since they've all been withdrawn?
Look, I think the point to be made is that we know that the companies went into business rescue because banks no longer had the confidence, of the directors of the company, precisely because of the allegations of corruption, etc. So, one thing that a business rescue practitioner coming in, would have to do is definitely look at the leadership structure. Try to incorporate proper corporate governance mechanisms, which will put your banks and other stakeholders at ease. Because what you see happening is that I think Bosasa has about 4,500 employees that directly depend on Bosasa for their livelihoods. And in addition to that, you've got about 3,100 suppliers, who also support families as well. So. And look, this is a ballpark figure, but some of those contracts could go on for the next 3 years. So you can see that it's a question of a company that at least can effect some form of trade out, whilst restructuring the leadership. And I think once one can achieve that, I think it wouldn't necessarily be a necessity to actually sell the company, but to effect a proper restructure of its leadership.
Well, let's watch the space and see what the directors of that company do decide to do. But let's take a look at Group 5. We heard earlier in the week that the construction company Group 5 had to go into business rescue. So, I mean, typically, what do you think might be achievable with that company, especially given the fact that the construction sector has been under a lot of pressure, and going forward, it doesn't look as though government is going to be giving out those tenders that a lot of the construction firms have been dependent on?
I think trying to speculate on what's going to happen, particularly when we don't have inside knowledge on the company structure, might be quite a dangerous venture to undertake. But what I can say is, having seen, for example, a company like Basil Reed that also went into business rescue, you find that these construction companies have other entities that they operate in other sectors. So what tends to happen is that they either sell off those underperforming entities, or they enter into some form of structured wind down. So there's a myriad of things that can be done, but you just need to have a clearer understanding of the corporate structure, what other entities are involved, and what other entities that Group 5 owns. But just to further expand on a point that my partner mentioned with regards to the issue of suppliers, there's a devastating impact when a company of the size of Group 5 collapses. And it's not just an issue that relates to employees, but it's also an issue that relates to suppliers, particularly when you look at the industry that Group 5 is in. It probably has thousands of suppliers that rely on it for its other projects that is undertaken. So I think that the shift in the mindset is required, where we embrace business rescue for what business rescue has been put in place to become, which is a procedure that ensures that entities that are able to be viable, but after being given some form of breathing room within which it can be restructured, we embrace that sort of procedure.
Gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much both for your time. That was Dr. Zolani Buba and Muzi Zwane, their partners at Buba Attorneys Incorporated.